Betty Smith, welcome to the Vermillion Unplugged. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and thank you for having me.
No, this is great. So this isn't the first time I've met you. I don't know if you remember, but I met you through Marilyn one time. Marilyn is the one that had a Corey. Matt.
Alice.
Yeah.
Alice.
Yeah, we went to she mentioned, I don't know, we're talking about like food stuff, but we went to Starbucks and then that's where she introduced
Yes,
me with my wife.
exactly.
Yeah.
I do remember that.
Yeah. I forgot what the whole thing was
Well,
about.
I think you were interested in food and what the scene was here and where there was room for.
Yeah, because we were doing, I think it was 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years. It was cold. I remember that. And it was about, because people know we make like tacos or stuff like that. Something like that. But that's how I know you. But apparently you are famous around town.
Well, I think I've lived here for 25 years, and I have a wonderful network of friendships and acquaintances. And so I have a very rich and full life here.
And then so also, tell me this. Y'all guys also have y'all guys own Mr. Smith's too, right?
No, we actually never owned it. And so here's the story of Mr. Smith's Bakery Cafe. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, my husband moved out to South Dakota with me because he had Parkinson's disease that was advancing. He could no longer continue his 26-year career as a police officer in Connecticut. And I got a job at University of South Dakota. We knew he had to retire. We moved out here, and he renovated an old house on South Harvard Street for a couple of years. It's a beautiful, beautiful house. He did a gorgeous job. And then he was at loose ends. He baked a little for the coffee shop. He baked a little for the winery. And then Greg Peterson, who at the time owned Jones Food, said, "Hey, I got a bakery. It's not being used. Would you like to run a bakery?" And Larry said, I love to bake bread, but I don't want to run anything. And so they opened together Mr. Smith's Bakery Cafe. When Greg Peterson closed Jones and opened up the hardware store, Ace Hardware, Mr. Smith stayed there. And that is why there is a bakery in a hardware store.
It was there first.
Yeah. So
okay.
Larry was, he died 4 years ago from side effects of Parkinson's disease, but he loved baking. And for most of our 47-year marriage, he baked at home. And when he started baking at that grocery store at Mr. Smith's Bakery Cafe, I had to start buying my bread for the first time.
Oh, wow. So he was a baker.
Yeah. And he what he did was he invented those salted baguettes that people love so much, the peasant breads. All of those recipes were his. In fact, he didn't really have recipes. He did it by feel. He often used his own starter that he created by capturing wild yeast. And the way that you capture wild yeast, because this was in my kitchen all the time, was you get a small bunch of grapes, you put it in a bowl, you smash them up a little bit and sprinkle some flour on top. And pretty soon local yeast is attracted to it. And it starts bubbling up, and then he would add more flour, he would add a little more water, and he would just get that going until it was a really good starter. And then he would use it and just keep feeding it for as long as he could. And so he used a lot of wild yeast in his baking.
Is that the when they use starter? Is it the starter they use for sourdough also?
Yeah. So a starter, when a starter gets mature, it can become sourdough.
Oh.
Yeah. And he was a fan of what we call the long, slow rise. And part of that was he didn't want to get up at 4:30 a.m. to start cooking bread. So he would create the dough the day before and put it in the refrigerator and allow it to rise in the refrigerator. So the first rise was a long, slow rise. And then he would punch it down when he got in the morning, shape it, and then the final rise would occur. And that's what gives that bread that incredible flavor.
Is the bread still used at Mr. Smith's?
Yes. So some of the bakers who were there when he was there are still there 20 years later.
So that's why it's so. So we've been here 4 years. 4 years in September, and we heard about Mr. Smith's. So I know there's Subway and there's a Jimmy John's, and I heard about Mr. Smith's, and then I heard it was in a Ace Hardware store. But now, thanks for clarifying everything. And I was like, why would I go to a sandwich shop inside a hardware store? Me being ignorant, I didn't know, but I heard it was really good. So I think me and my wife went, and then I didn't know, like, with the paper, like, you get to pick your item. So at first it was confusing, but I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. And then, we ate it, and I was like, I swear, I was like, whoa, this is really, actually, it's amazing, especially the bread. And I always wondered, I was like, do they make their own bread? And I heard people saying, yeah, they do. So I think that's one of the keys, because Subway is not, I'm not bashing on it, but it's not that great. Jimmy John's, I don't go there. I had their stuff sometimes when they do like an event, but the Mr. Smith's, that is different, and it's really good. I think everyone knows, right?
Yeah, and they still use his baking process because some of those bakers are still there who trained with him years and years ago. He ultimately had to stop baking because he couldn't stand anymore. But as he became more frail, the management created, they installed accessibility hardware for him, and you can still see the holes in the where they had the bar for him to hold on to while he was baking.
That's so cool. Is because also one thing I always wondered too is what makes Mr. Smith so, I guess, popular in town? If there's like a Subway and a Jimmy John's, or I don't know if there's other sandwich places, but this place, because it's also not just sandwiches. Last year, I went there. Me and two guys, we went there, and they were gonna get breakfast. I was like, I don't want breakfast. I don't want to eat a sandwich. It's not the only thing they serve. They had what's it called, on eggs Benedict. I saw it, and I was like, we should go there, because I've heard in town, I was like, there's not many places that serve breakfast, and I was like, well, I see Mr. Smith's. So me and my wife went, and I got the eggs Benedict. First time I ever had it, and it had the hollandaise. I never tried hollandaise, and I was like, ooh, this is pretty good. And it's so weird, because my parents came too after that. I want to say a few months ago. Did they come in the summer? They came, and I took them. I said, let's go to Mr. Smith's. It's cool. It's in like a hardware store. It's like, it's really cool. And we got the sandwiches. They liked it. They loved it. I'm like, this is pretty good. So I don't know. I'm ranting a lot on it, but it's really good.
Yeah, it's kind of a local, almost a secret, that you have to go to the hardware store to get these sandwiches, and the bread. The bread sells out all the time. When my husband was still baking there, he would make a special bread every day, and people would hang out in the little cafe there waiting for the special bread to come out. And sometimes they would buy it right out of the kitchen. So he would make beer cheddar bread. He was very, very inventive. He just said that was the joy of his life. I think he liked it a lot better than being a police captain and shoving papers around and applying for grants and police planning and all of that. He was an administrator before he left the police department.
Are you also a cook? Or was it mostly just him that bakes? Or
we have always cooked together, always. That was a big part of our lives. We always made dinner together, and even when he was too disabled, he would sit. I have a little table and chair in the kitchen, and he would always sit in the kitchen and say, "Let me help." So it was something we always did together. When our kids were young, we would set the table, we'd put a tablecloth down, we'd use real china, we'd light candles. We always made a big deal out of dinner because, to me, it's the time that the family comes together. And now, now that I'm the only person in my household, I often have friends for dinner. at least once a week, and I love cooking for other people. And Larry's specialty was certainly breads and desserts, and my specialty is probably French, Italian, and Moroccan food.
Ooh, see, there's something we have in common. So my wife, our friends know, my wife, she's the cook. She loves cooking. We cook every day. We rarely go out to eat unless it's like a special occasion. We cook amazing. Her Mexican food, because she's from Mexico, it's amazing. And then me, because she says the same thing. She says feeling. I have to like follow the recipe, but I follow it exact. And I'm more technical, but she does feeling. She knows this is this. I feel like when I add stuff like seasonings, it cancels out. I don't know why, but I am more of the dessert baker one. So like, for example, there's a thing we sell on, sometimes we'll do on the flower farm. I'm in flower farm, at the farm market. They're called conchas, so it's like a Mexican sweetbread. It means seashell in Spanish. I'll make those by hand, and I think they're great. Or like if it's a dessert or anything with flour, I do that. And my wife, she admits it that she can't bake. I don't know what it is, because she also tries to do it by feeling. She's like, I don't need no recipe. I'll do it. Something comes out wrong or this and that. Or me, if it involves flour, I like it. I'll help out my wife with like making tortillas, the harina, flour tortillas. Or if we make like a pasta, instead of buying pasta, in a box, I make it. I make the pasta. I got the
Big
machine.
difference.
Yeah,
Big difference. Homemade pasta.
It is. I've noticed it, like, because we have the roller or the thing to flatten the flour by layers. But it also has an attachment to like cut into like I don't know what size it is. It's like a fettuccine style. But over the past few months, I was like, I don't want to do that. Let me just flatten it out, and I'll use a pizza roller, and I could cut it. Sure, it's not like equal, but I don't know. All right, we could talk about food the whole time. But see, like it's kind of, I like food. There's a connection with food with a lot of people. I've noticed that too in town. The people like in downtown, the restaurants, even at when they do the welcome table. I talked to John about it, and food brings community together. It could be the ribs rods, or it could be Thursday on the Plots, or whatever event. If there's food, people go to it. So,
yeah, I think humans have been eating together as a way of solidifying their communities from the very beginning. And I think it's a powerful way to connect.
I agree on that. Where are you from? Because are you originally from Vermillion?
No, I was born and brought up in New York City.
Oh, what made you want to move, or when did you move?
Well, so I moved to Connecticut in 1969 and lived there for 30 years, and then applied for a tenure track professorship at the university and came out here in 1999. So it's been 25 years.
And have you seen the growth of Vermillion? So was it smaller, or has it always been like this? Or
yeah, so Vermillion didn't grow for a long time, but in recent years it has been growing. And I was just at a meeting early this morning of ICAP, which is an organization that contains representatives from all the government organizations in the greater Vermillion area. And we're always looking at housing units because we have a housing shortage. We now have over 15,400 residents in Clay County. 78% of them are in the city of Vermillion. And we have grown. 5 years ago, we were 14,000 something. So we are, as a community, growing. Certainly the university is growing. There's a real shortage of housing since the university took down some housing. And it's been a little difficult for students, particularly international students, to find housing. But in the meantime, private developers have come in and begun building multifamily housing. And some of it, at least, is affordable for students.
I've noticed that over the past few years, I even talked to people about that. They say it's always been like that. There's always been a shortage. It's a college town, but what surprises me is since it is a college town, and there's students coming back and forth, and it's growing, wouldn't builders want to? Aren't they like, what's the word? Don't they want to build more?
So what developers want is profit, and it's not always profitable. And they don't necessarily want to manage housing in the long term. So, number one, we're very short on property. There's not a lot of buildable land left within the city limits. So, and some people who own property in the city limits don't want to develop it. They're land banking it as the price goes up, and they're leaving it to the next generation.
Oh, okay.
So there's land that could be built upon, but the people who own it are not willing to take that risk. I mean, development is a risky proposition. You don't know whether interest rates are going to go for or against you. Right now, construction costs are about $250 per square foot. And that means if you want 1,000 square foot unit, that's $250,000. That's a lot of money. And interest rates have been relatively high in recent years, although the Federal Reserve just dropped them 0.5 point. And I think they're going to continue to drop interest rates unless inflation gets higher.
Okay. I noticed there are a few development projects going on. The first one I know is Jolly. That one's planned to have some lots and houses. So there's already Bliss Point. The Jack Powell edition?
Yes, the Jack Powell edition. It will probably be 2025 before you'll see the first construction go on there. It's complicated at this point, but I think the plan right now is 20 senior units, a lot of multifamily housing.
Okay. And then another one that I saw, it was during the city council meeting, that it's, I guess in front of that land that's across from Ace Hardware Store and behind where Hex Barbecue is, where it used to be, I think they told me, a trailer park?
Yep. It's been a trailer park since I've been here. And the owner is now developing 35 houses. And I think they'll be single family and twin homes.
That was another thing. So yesterday, I mentioned this to Kevin, but in the morning, so me and my mom, we would talk in the morning all the time before I had to work. And we were just talking about housing. And then we were talking about duplexes and all that. And we were always wondering, because I told her, said, around here, I've noticed there's people that, they live in duplexes or multifamily homes. But it's like they buy like half of it. And we were talking about like, well, why would people want to live in a duplex rather than like a regular house? That's what I was wondering. Isn't it better if builders just build like a regular house versus duplexes? Or is it also cheaper for them to do that?
Yeah, so it's way cheaper to build a duplex.
Okay, that probably.
And it's a lot cheaper bringing utilities into the building and so on, because you've only got one line from the street instead of two. And for residents, it's also cheaper because you've got one wall that doesn't face outside. And so it's a little bit cheaper to heat and cool.
But do families prefer that? Or maybe it's just me. I'm thinking, I don't want to live, because I live in an apartment right now. I have actually neighbors, and actually they're cool. But sometimes you could hear them. That's why I was wondering, like, why would someone buy like half a duplex and know there's a neighbor? But I guess also, would it be cheaper for the person versus like a regular house?
Yeah, it's less expensive to buy, but there's another part of it too. And in the United States, we have always emphasized individuality. Like, you want your own home away from everybody else's home. And there's two sides to that. So one side is that, yes, you have privacy, but the other side is that you're isolated. And what I've noticed, particularly since I've become a single person, is that we all need people in our lives. We evolved in communities of about 150. And particularly as people get older, they become more and more isolated. And people who are isolated don't live as long. They're less happy and they're less healthy. So having contact with other humans actually increases health and longevity. So as we get older, sometimes our needs change, and so that's why. I mean, my mother. I'm this month, well, October. I'm going out to California to celebrate her 101st birthday, and as I look at why she's lived so long, she lives in a really nice community where she has one meal a day with other people. And so even though she's an introvert and she's a reader, she does the New York Times crossword puzzle every day, right? She's sharp as a tack. She would not have survived this long without the kind of support she gets from her community. And, as I look at my future, I would like to live in a rich community. I live in a little cul-de-sac downtown, and I love my neighbors. I love where I live. I've got a really strong friendship network, and all of those things are really important. As I get older, what I'm thinking about is there's a limit to the amount of time in which I can continue to shovel snow, mow grass, and keep a house up. And so I'm starting to think ahead and have joined with a group of people in Vermillion. And we plan to build an innovative kind of housing called co-housing. And essentially, everybody has smaller houses averaging about 1,000 square feet. But then you have a community house. And you can, you have your mailbox in the community house. You kind of run into people every day. You maybe once a week have meals together in the community house. You have maybe a small gym and a living room where people can meet to talk about books or, cooking, cookbooks, share, share. People in co-housing share a lot of spaces. So one of the requirements we've come up with is that we've got to have a equipment shed because we all have kayaks and cross-country skis and snowshoes and bicycles. So if you're going to have a really tiny house, those things don't fit well.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's having shared spaces where you get a sense of community, but also having private spaces. So you've got a backyard, you've got a tiny house, and you probably have a front porch because sometimes people want to run into other people. If you sit on your front porch, we've got pedestrian walkways, a community garden, and so on.
Could that also be part of that? I've heard about something called, if I remember right, you correct me, something about walkable?
Yes, it's a walkable community.
There it is. Yeah,
it's a walkable community. And, it's interesting. Walkable communities are healthier communities because if you're walking 30 minutes a day, you're going to be much healthier than if you're sitting on the couch most of the time or just walking from your kitchen to your living room to your bedroom. Health requires that we move. We evolved that way. We evolved as a walking species. We walk to pick up grain. So one of the things I love about living downtown is that I walk to the library, I walk to the bank, I walk to the coffee shop. Wherever I go, I walk. And that, I think, has made me a healthier and certainly a happier person. You get a little sunshine every day. You get a little exercise.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed here, too, in Vermillion, because, man, I say this every back home at Fort Worth, it's more like a city. And to go to Walmart, we got to drive like 15 minutes. You think it would take 15 minutes, but now there's traffic and it's annoying. Here, for first thing is there's no traffic. I like that. Work or the university is super, super close. Like we live right across Prentice Park. Same thing, like hospital's right there. So if we go to appointments, it's right there. Downtown, Saturday or Sunday, we were gonna go to. No, actually, we did go. We went to Cow and Spoon, and we were gonna drive. And Myra, my wife, was like, "Let's just walk." And at first, I was like, "It's kind of far, isn't it?" No, we walked. And I'm like, "Oh snap!" You just walk. You see people around. Libraries right here. You can walk to restaurants, this and that. I think only Walmart might be like the farthest away. But yeah, it's walkable stuff. Another example that I'm remembering over there in a part where my family and my wife's from Mexico, there's a capital called Guanajuato. And that one's, I guess it is a city. It's in the mountains. Beautiful. Amazing. But everything is walkable because besides the stairs, there's the house or the apartment, whatever. And then if you need to go to the store, there's actually a few stores, corner stores right here, markets over here. Actually, if we go to even to their downtown, it's just walkable. You could go, everything's mostly on bus. So, but you can even just walk there. Man, and it gets kind of tiring. I got tired. And my excuse is because of the altitude. But yeah, everyone's walking, you go here. So it's really cool. The only bad thing is if it rains, weather. I think that's the only annoying part. But the walkable community, I like the idea. It's really cool. When do you have a plan for that? Like when it might start, or is it just like a future thing?
Yeah, so we've been working together on this for a while. 5 of us spent 4 days at a national co-housing conference over the summer and learned so much about the development process, the financing process, and so on. And so we're ready to go. We are right now just looking for land, and we've got a few possibilities. Have been talking to, real estate agent and the Vermillion Chamber Development Corporation, the city, and we've got a few possibilities out there. So as soon as we find land, we are ready. We are ready to go. We've got an architect and we've got a development consultant. So we're right now. The holdup is just finding the right land. So what we're basically doing is creating a limited liability corporation that belongs to all the members. We're planning on building 20 to 30 units, and they will be units where it would be a condominium association. You buy a unit and a share in the entire development. And for me, it's a big project, but it's ultimately very selfish because this is where I want to live. This is how I want to live.
No, that's cool.
And there's such a network of people in Vermillion who are interested in living in a real neighborhood. The way we build houses now is very different from the way they've built traditionally. We build attached garages, often in the front of the house, so that nobody has eyes on the street, right? You've got a door and there's usually a window, but in front of the house, I call them snout houses. You've got a garage. So what people do is they go directly from their home into the garage. They go to the grocery store. They come back in the garage and go directly in their home. They never meet their neighbors. And so there are people here who are completely isolated by the architecture of their home. If you want to build a house that will make you happy and help you live longer, what you do is you build in a neighborhood where the windows are on the street, where you're not walking directly into your garage, right? So you're meeting your neighbors, where you've got a front yard and ideally a front porch. Front porches are a really important part of creating community. And so in our co-housing development, every unit will have a front porch.
Okay. Is there like a target audience, or is it could be for anyone, or?
Well, I think our target audience, really people who are, smaller households. We're only going to build 1 and 2 bedrooms.
Okay.
So, and it's not going to be designed for families with children. We're really designing for, they'll be universally accessible.
Mhm.
So, 19-inch high toilets, walk-in showers, kitchens that are accessible and no steps.
Okay.
So it's ideal for older people, but all of us ultimately are going to be old.
That is true.
If
That
we're
is
lucky.
true.
If we're
Yeah.
lucky, we get to be old.
That no, yeah. So mostly like people that just like even like when they're retired because their kids are off, they're by themselves. Maybe they want to downsize. So and still have that like you were saying, that community.
Yeah.
Instead of being isolated.
Yeah.
I never thought about that,
And
being isolated.
We've gotten a lot of interest from people from out of state as well. I was contacted this past week, somebody from Indiana who is planning on retiring in 2026. And she saw a program that we did about our co-housing development that was, it's on YouTube. It's Rotary. If you look up Rotary co-housing, you'll find it. And we just did I think it was a 20-minute presentation for Rotary a few weeks ago. And she saw that and she said, oh, this is what I want to do. She contacted me and she said, how do I sign up?
That's great.
Yeah.
Now, another thing, what attracts people to Vermillion? Because when we got here, because I came here for a job first, and the plan was we were going to stay here for a year and then go back. And now it's been 4 years. We've met a lot of people, community's amazing. We're already integrated, hopefully. Hopefully, like by the end of this year, we might get our house. So I'm like, what? Why am I attracted here? But what makes people like want to stay here or they love it here?
Yeah. Well, I can just tell you my story, right? I don't know everybody's story, but my story is that I had multiple offers from universities after I finished my PhD. And when I applied here, they took me out to the river and said, we kayak out here. And I thought, wow, that looks cool. Mm-hmm. And they showed me all the amazing arts and music opportunities here. And I'm a classical music lover. I'm an art lover. I think that's been a really important part of my life. And I thought, wow, this would be a great place to live. And then I looked at the old neighborhoods, and the way that the old neighborhoods in Vermillion are constructed is with front porches, with eyes on the street, with trees. I mean, trees moderate temperatures. In the summer, it's 10 degrees cooler under a tree, right? So we've got these streets that are full of trees. And I thought, man, I could live here. Originally, my dissertation committee said, well, okay, you can go there for a year, but then you should trade up, right, to another university. Well, I was here for a year and I thought, I don't want to go anywhere. So after about 10 years here, my husband and I bought a retirement home in Southern California, but we never retired there.
Wow.
To us, Southern California felt disconnected in comparison to what we have here.
Really?
So, in Southern California, we bought the house. We invited all the neighbors over for a big barbecue. So we put out all this furniture in the driveway. We put out a barbecue. We had this big party, and then we never heard from our neighbors again. And that's normal in California. People don't socialize with neighbors. They might drive halfway across the city to join a hiking group. They drive everywhere. You go to the grocery store, it takes you half an hour. Well, here, you invite somebody over, and pretty soon you're part of their social network, right? So again, food connects people. You meet somebody at the plots, and you trade stories about why you're here and what you're doing, and pretty soon you find out something about them that interests you, and you become friends. This is a place where friendship networks are really rich. part of that is that we've created a lot of public spaces here. So in public spaces, we have galleries, we have the movie theater, we have those mini parks downtown, we have cafes that are inexpensive, right? You for the price of a cup of coffee, you meet people, you hang out, right? I've noticed that there are some people who actually spend a good part of their day at the Bean, and they get to know people at the Bean, right? And people at the Bean know them. So this is a place that facilitates good relationships, and we have so many rich cultural offerings, and of course the river. So I'm a kayaker. I've since I came here, I've been paddling that river and a bunch of the local lakes, and there's a really dynamic paddling community here. Many different age groups, but you'll often see groups leave from Myron's Grove and go down to Clay County or Mulberry Bend, or sometimes longer. We have river races that are really fun.
So is that, you like this community a lot, right?
I love this community.
Is that why also because of course you're on the Clay County Commission, is that why you're really involved in it too?
Yeah, so I've always been involved in the community from the time I came here. And in the beginning, I'm a public administration scholar, among other things. And so in the beginning, it was really helping the community in planning processes. So we did cultural planning. The community rejected the comprehensive plan of development that CCOG created. This is many years ago. And so there were a series of meetings to create a new comprehensive plan for the city that reflected the desires of people in the city. I ran a leadership program here for 9 years called Leadership Vermillion, and we trained people to be community leaders and how to do strategic planning. I chaired the Historic Preservation Commission for the county for a number of years. So I've really enjoyed working with the community, and my service on the commission was really because here I was. I was basically full-time caregiving for my husband, and I wanted to do one thing that would be helpful to the community. So I chose the county commission, and fortunately, the voters also chose me. The end of my term is on January 1, and I decided not to run again. At 74 years old, I've decided that it would be inappropriate for me to continue on the commission until I'm 78. And so I would like to see a younger generation get involved in planning and running this county and this city.
Oh, okay. Now, because I feel like a lot of people don't know, and even me, and I should know, I'm learning, but what do you guys do? Like, what is it? Because I'll tell you my thoughts before knowing about how like the local government work. I thought it was just a bunch of people, either, for example, it could be the city council. I thought they meet up every like 2 weeks on a Monday. They get paid and they just talk. Apparently, it's not like that at all. Because I spoke to them and I've seen it, and I think it's very stressful, but it's a lot of stuff. Now that's only like a city thing, but you guys are Clay County. So what do you guys do on that stuff?
Yeah, so a lot of what we do is roads and bridges. So there are county roads, county bridges. They all have to be kept in good repair. The year that I joined the commission, I got involved in creating a master transportation plan for the county. So we were looking 10 to 20 years ahead, and what will our transportation needs be? We started thinking about things like bike paths. It would be great if, for example, from the city of Vermillion, get out to Clay County Park, which is a beautiful space and has picnic facilities and so on. We also run or are responsible for the sheriff's department and the jail, in terms of budgeting, planning and zoning, mental health, veteran services, the housing, the court system. So a lot of what we do is planning and budgeting. And so we do have a comprehensive plan of development for the county that is in the process of being revised right now. We also work closely with the city of Vermillion. On the outskirts of Vermillion, there are a lot of spaces that are beginning to be developed.
Is that the joint jurisdiction?
Joint jurisdiction,
Got it.
exactly. Very few people know what joint jurisdiction. In fact, somebody this morning asked me, what is joint jurisdiction? And it's the area that is right now in county jurisdiction, but is likely in the future to become part of the city. And so in those areas, the city and the county work together to make decisions about planning and zoning.
Okay. Now, I have a few friends that live in that joint jurisdiction area. Also, I guess what's the difference between, because I'm still trying to understand it, because they're not in the city, but kind of ish. But how does, like, do they got different ordinances, or what can they not do? What can they do? How does that work?
Yeah. So the county has ordinances, but they do not apply within the city because the city has its own codes. So we have a planning and zoning commission that regulates land in the county. The city has planning and zoning regulations for inside the city. And they're different, appropriately so, right? So the city takes care of infrastructure, right? They bring to each house water, sewer, right? Electricity, and so on. Outside the city, people have to take care of that on their own, right? They have to build a septic system, and they have to keep that septic system in good repair. So in the areas of joint jurisdiction, it's, there's an argument to be made that there are things that wouldn't be allowed in the city, for example, that are allowed in the county. We can have a nutrient plant in the county, but it would be really difficult to do ag facilities, for example, in the city. You wouldn't want an ag facility in the middle of your neighborhood.
Okay.
So if there's likely to be a neighborhood in the future, it's in joint jurisdiction. And what that means is that decisions are made by the county and the city sitting together. So, for example, the city council and the county commission will actually meet jointly to make decisions about joint jurisdiction.
Oh, okay. So it's like a hybrid, like both. Is the, like, for example, well, yeah, I'll give that example. Like the Walmart's right there across the highway. There's a development right there. Because I know a few people that live there. How can they become part of the city? Like, because that's the future, right? Like,
that's
hopefully.
The future. That's the future.
So how do they get? How does that become part? Do they have to like agree, or does it just come on a notice, or?
Yeah, what you're talking about is the annexation process.
Yeah, annexation.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and annexation processes are determined by state statutes. A certain percentage of the people who live there have to consent.
Okay.
But the city also has to consent because it's going to cost them a lot of money, right? They're going to have to run infrastructure out there. All of a sudden, the roads will be their responsibility. And they have to look at, will taxes from that area actually pay for ultimately, right? How is it going to affect the budget? That is what they have to look at.
Will the taxes go up? Because I've talked to a few people. They say, yes, it will. Talk to someone in zoning, and they said not necessarily. But how? Let's say I had a house over there right now, and all the neighbors are like, yeah, you know what? Let's be annexed. Let's be part of the city. So they can have like, hey, plumbing and all this and that. But what happens with property taxes? Because I know that those are big lots. What does it go up by a lot? or is it just maybe some people are just kind of scared?
So you have to think of this as a balance sheet, right? Right now, you're responsible for septic. You are probably hooked up to clay rural water. You have electricity through the co-op. If you become part of the city, you get a sewer fee every month, right? You electricity. I actually think it's cheaper in town than it is outside jurisdiction. So you get a bill every month or so for water, sewer, etc. But you're not paying other entities for that, right? So those are really the big things. Taxation is the price we pay for services, and you do get more, I think, services from being in the city. And I think you might save in some areas and pay more in others. So it's a balance sheet. It's not a yes or no answer.
Okay.
And I have to say that I'm looking at property in joint jurisdiction for co-housing. I want our co-housing development to be in city limits because I think it's just a much simpler life. You don't have to worry about getting your septic system cleaned all the time. You don't have to worry about paying a bunch of different entities for different things. You get one bill from the city every month, and I've been pleasantly surprised by the cost of water and power and sewer.
Okay, so it just depends. But the good thing is also the owners of those or the people that live there, as long as they also agree, it's not like, oh yeah, we get to take it. They're like, no,
exactly.
No, yeah, as long as they all.
Yeah,
okay.
It's a vote. It's a vote of people who reside in joint jurisdiction. So it's actually a mutual decision.
Oh, okay. No, that sounds good. That sounds good.
And the reason we have joint jurisdiction is because the city acknowledges that it will probably need to grow out and develop infrastructure. And, because every jurisdiction has bond limits. So a bond is the way that cities borrow money. And you've got to borrow money in order to create new, sewer power and so on, to create new utility lines. So they always have to look at there's a limit to the amount of money that a city can borrow and keep its good credit rating. So the city of Vermillion has to look at what can we afford today. Maybe we can afford to build all that infrastructure in 10 years. Maybe we can afford it today, but they have to always be planning how they're going to build out.
Okay, could and correct me. Do you could you guys also out there? Not speaking of Vermillion, speaking of the county, could you guys stop the growth of or stop the increase of the property taxes, or even lower it? Technically, do you guys also have the power for that?
So our property taxes are the only tax base that counties have. Cities get part of the sales tax, and they do most of their money is not from property tax. Property tax is the only thing that counties have. We can apply for grants for roads and so on. We can apply for federal funds. That obviously is not a given. So we have a very small pot of money. In addition, Clay County is the smallest county in the state. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and we only have so many acres that we can tax. So our tax base is very small. On top of that, a lot of our land belongs to the state and federal governments, and we cannot tax that. And land that belongs to nonprofits is mostly tax-free as well. So we have a huge problem in terms of funding roads and bridges and jails and so on, because our tax base is very, very, very restricted.
That's why also, because I just learned about this, that's why, for example, in Vermillion USD, they can't, if I remember right, they can't be taxed.
Right.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah,
why.
USD can't be taxed. All those federal lands out by the river, they cannot be taxed. Um, yeah,
So let's say theoretically, if they did get taxed, I don't know why, but let's say they did. Let's say they were private, a private institution, and they got taxed. Would it generate a lot of revenue for the okay, a lot then.
yeah. It's a huge revenue loss, and because we have such a small amount of property to tax already, you take all those lands off the tax rolls, and I I would guess we have the smallest tax base. Yeah, we have a very, very small tax base.
Okay, now I'm a man. Okay, I'm trying to figure out how government and how a business works. Just see if we could catch on. But you can correct me. So let's say I know like I don't say every year, but usually property taxes increases. Not like double nothing, but they just they'll slowly increase. And it's for the county or we say for the city. But why the increase? Like what's the point of doing the increase? Do you guys also need more money every year? I know there's different projects. That's what I'm trying to understand. Like why the
Yeah,
increases sometimes.
so there are a few reasons. I mean, one is just inflation. You have to keep salaries of county employees. Yeah, they have to be kept up with inflation. If you don't do that, your employees leave. Right. So, for example, we train a deputy sheriff, and we send the deputy sheriff off to the academy, and we pay a full salary for him or her to get their law enforcement certification. If you are not paying them a fair wage, why wouldn't they just move to the Sioux Falls Police Department or another county that's paying them more? And then you have to go through the whole process again. It is very, very, very expensive to lose employees. A lot of our employees go through lengthy certification programs. If you're an assessor or an auditor or work for the treasurer's office, all of these jobs need training, supervision, and it can take a long time for them to attain certification. The county has to pay for that. So every time we lose an employee, we are losing a lot of money,
Okay.
right? We're
Yeah.
losing a lot of money. And so we try to keep employee salaries at the market. So we look, and this year we spent a lot of time. We actually had it the summer before last who looked at every comparable county and what they were paying everyone. And we try to stay in the middle. We don't want to be on the top, but we sure don't want to be on the bottom half. We want to keep our employees in the long term. So that's one thing. The other thing is that cost of services go up. So we contract out for a lot. We have to buy things like food and toilet paper for the jail, right? Those prices have gone up pretty dramatically. But the biggest tax increase that the county has had has been for a new jail and law enforcement center.
Yeah, I heard that too.
And I don't remember the exact amount, but it's something like $280,000 a year in loans that we have to pay back. So that went right. That comes out of taxes. Why did we build a new jail and law enforcement center? Well, because our old jail was built in 1912, and for anybody who has seen it, it is not fit for anybody to stay there longer than 72 hours.
Yeah, Andy Howe told me about it, and I've heard about it. So that was one of the things. Actually, people were like, "Yeah, actually, we do need a new jail." I haven't been in there, and I need to go check it out. Just to see how it is. But they say, yeah, it's one of like those old school bars and everything.
Yeah, it's very, very old school. And in the 1970s, it would have passed muster, but in 2024, it's really not good for long. We can keep people there for a few days at the most. And when somebody's on trial, they will stay in our jail for a few days while the trial's going on. But what we've been doing is driving prisoners all over creation, anywhere where there's a jail bed that's available. as soon as that 48-hour period is over, we send them to a facility that's more appropriate for longer term stays.
And that costs money too, right?
It does, because you need a deputy sheriff and a car, right? You've got to pay for gas. You've got to pay the salary. And it means that you need enough officers that you can be driving somebody to Yankton, and then somebody's got to drive them back, right, for trial. We drive people to Yankton, to Minnehaha County, occasionally to Nebraska and Iowa. We've had prisoners escorted out to Winter. It's wherever we can find a bed. And the problem is that nobody wants to build a jail. And you can understand that. But finally, we had no options, right? It is costing us a fortune. And the price of jail beds has grown astronomically. When I first joined the commission, we were looking at $80 a night for an inmate. And now in a lot of jurisdictions, we're paying well over $100 a night. You could send somebody to a nice hotel for what we pay to keep somebody in jail.
If it was, for example, let's say someone, I know it's common in Texas, if someone like, I guess, what do you call it, privatized or whatever, like a private company, if they're like, hey, you know what, we'll build a jail. Like, let's say that jail wasn't built, you guys still had the other one, and they're like, we'll build a jail. Would that save money on the county, technically?
Not necessarily, because essentially the county is then beholden to a private corporation, and the private corporation sets the rate. So all of a sudden you've got a private for-profit company wanting to make a profit.
Yep.
And it's the only place you have to bring your prisoners. And so they get to decide how much a night you pay.
What about property taxes? Because since it's private, they would pay taxes to the county, or would that work? Because they're not contracted out?
Well, that's an interesting question. That would, for me, that would be a lawyer question. I'd want to ask the state's attorney, because you've got two things going on. One, and it would also depend on, there are private companies that will do the building, and then they'll lease it to you in the long term. There are private companies, and then, obviously you virtually own the facility, right? You set what it costs, you're paying the cost of incarceration, period. But other companies own the jail, and they get to decide the price of incarceration.
Okay.
And my issue with it is that I don't want private corporations to have sovereignty over prisoners. I think prisoners' rights are at risk when you've got a private corporation that's running things. And there's been some evidence over the last few decades, as more and more prisons and jails privatize, that people's constitutional rights are not always honored.
What about privatization in other areas? Like, I know, I guess like the bigger topics would be, for example, what's his name? Elon Musk, with like not with Tesla, but what's the other one called? Is it Starlink and all that stuff? SpaceX? Yeah, all that stuff. I know some people are worried, and they're like, hey, that's not kind of cool. Because, like, man, all these, like, billionaires are going to space. But honestly, for me, I was like, man, if I had money, I feel like I would do the same thing. But could there be a problem with that? Or, because I feel like they're doing innovation, right?
Yeah. So I don't think there's a problem with government contracting out for services and projects. I have never thought that was, I actually think that's a good expenditure. So I'll give you an example. A lot of software is required in order to run a government. So you've got to have tax software, you have to have assessment software, you have to have auditing software. So you have to have, every department needs software. And if you are doing that yourself, you are spending a fortune trying to keep up with the latest. And you probably, over time, as the rest of the world learns more, your staff are going to be more isolated from innovation, and it's going to be very difficult for you to keep up, right? So what most governments do now is they contract out for software services. And that works really, really well. And the reason it works well is because if that software company is not performing, you can fire them and hire another software company.
Oh, okay.
Right? It's the same with space exploration, right? So increasingly, space exploration is privatized, right?
Yeah,
SpaceX, right? And NASA is not they're not building their own rockets, right? But what they're doing is creating the policy that hires companies to create rockets.
Okay.
Right. And to find out what they need to know about space. And that works because if SpaceX isn't performing, they can say, we'll do it ourselves or we'll hire someone else. Where it doesn't work is when sovereignty is at issue and there's no accountability. So, for example, in a prison, inmates don't necessarily, they don't have access to an accountability system. They're incarcerated. And if their rights are violated, what are they going to do? Well, the only thing they can do is hire a lawyer because it's a private organization that's running the prison.
Okay. I should have asked Caitlin Collier about this stuff.
Yeah.
I should have
Yeah.
asked.
So that's the big problem, right? It's accountability. If you have no mechanism for accountability, you should not privatize it.
Now, I'm going to go off topic. Are you familiar with the movie Iron Man? You know the
No.
character? You know the Marvel characters? Oh, man. Okay. I'll give you a brief rundown. So there's a guy named Tony Stark, super, super smart. He built a super suit. And he built it in that first movie. And I think in the second movie, in the beginning, they were talking about he had to go to like the Supreme Court and this and that. Because they're saying, hey, this is a weapon and you shouldn't have it. And he's all like, well, it's mine. I designed it, but like technically, he has like rockets, missiles, all this stuff in the superhero movie. But it's also because in the first movie, there was one scene, he goes to the Middle East and, he's fighting terrorists and this and that. And I was thinking about that scene lately. And that's what I was wondering, like, if I invented that, let's say I did that. I made a suit just like that. Is it right for the government to take it? Or I don't know if they could take it, but like say, hey, no, you can't do that. But I'm like, I made it. It's my suit. Well, what do you think about that? I don't know. I don't know if that ever happened.
Yes.
It's way off.
So what you're onto is the problem of government taking and individual freedom. And our Constitution was created in the 1780s, right? So they didn't know anything about Google or Iron Man or space or anything else. And so we do the best we can to use the Constitution to make decisions. But ultimately, it's the U.S. Supreme Court that determines what your personal rights are versus the rights of your community. And, the gun issue is a great example of that problem. So how far do the rights of a gun owner extend until it becomes a problem for the entire community? So obviously, it's not that anybody can have any kind of weapon 24/7 and use it in any way they like and do target practice on the plots, right? we know we can't do that.
Yeah.
And the question that the courts are always working on is, where's the line? Where is the line? And I think ultimately it's going to be, if there is any change, it will be a legislative change. And the Second Amendment, everybody argues about what the Second Amendment actually means. Did it mean that every state could have a militia? Or did it mean that everybody has an individual right to a gun? And that's still controversial. When I taught public policy, we always read a book on that had both sides of the gun argument. And it's a fascinating constitutional problem. Speaking
of like arms, there's a YouTuber. His name is, if I remember right, it's like Pyro, something like that. But it's not even like guns. He's into lasers. So throughout it, I've seen him like for years and years. All he does is, and he's just like my age. So he modifies laser, like, so it could be small lasers, anything. Just basic little laser or basic light bulbs, flashlights, this and that. He just modifies it and it becomes like a real laser that, he'll show like his little experiment, like, oh, look, I could blow up like these balloons, pa, 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 pa. Or he'll shine this. He's always wearing protective stuff. And he's like, hey, this is very dangerous. Or his caption will be like, I made like a death ray and it like burns everything. He doesn't sell it. He just does it for fun. I remember like he got, if I remember right, he either got like raided by the FBI or something, or they were like, hey, they were trying to take down his videos because they're saying, hey, making a weapon, this is horrible, this and that. But the whole thing was like, he's not, I guess he is, but it's just for fun. It's not like he's selling it, but they're saying like it's dangerous because he's like, not really showing it, but like how you could, make a little laser you could buy. What do you call it? Those red
Pointers?
Yeah, a laser pointer. And he makes it like, it could like kind of burn something off. But that's why I was wondering, like, that fine line, like, hey, but I'm doing this, or is he allowed to do it without showing it? What do you think on that stuff?
Yeah, so a lot of these are where the line is usually determined by lawyers in a courtroom. Right? but I will say that certainly public safety has primacy, and I think collectively we all care about public safety. If somebody threatens public safety, there's usually a consequence.
I wanted to talk about the gun issue, and I don't have a side to it, and I'll give you my side really, really quick. So before, I was one of the people like, hey, I'm not into guns. My family never had it. We were like, hey, we're not into it. Until this happened in Texas, it happened in a church in West Side. And I remember it was in, I think it was in it was right before COVID. And there's a video, like some guy just came in there and he had a shotgun.
I remember it.
Yeah. And then he blasted someone and he shot another one. And then luckily someone shot him. Everyone's like armed. That was the first time I'm like, whoa, snap. So I went to a fire range with my cousin because he's really into it. Me and my sister, we went. First time I shot a gun. And I was really scared. But after that church thing, I was like, man, maybe I wonder if people should. Because at first I was like, no, I don't need that. But I'm like, what if someone did attack? Luckily, people were armed. And then I came to South Dakota. Apparently, people like their guns. And then there's a little church event they do. It's super. At first, it was called a pumpkin shootout. For some reason, I thought they were gonna catapult pumpkins. For some reason, that's what I thought. That's what came through my mind. And no, they just go and it's somewhere in the rural part. I think it's an Elk Point. They have people get together, they fire weapons or whatever, and then there's a chili cook-off, this and that. So that was the first time, or the second time I started firing weapons. And I would talk to them, and I'm like, why do you guys have a gun? What's it for? They're like, well, I don't want someone to come in. Because at first, before that, I was like, well, no one's going to come in, or I'll just call the cops and this and that. And then that's where I started realizing, hey, they take some time, or hey, if I have it, I can protect myself. But there's also that other part where I'm like, the militia part, I've heard people say it's only for well-rounded militia. And then what happened, this is what I think, like you hear like cartels and this and that. In Mexico, guns, I don't know about it now. Before it was like this, they're illegal. So, as a good citizen, people follow the rules. And I remember my wife saying they had like a buyback program, and my father-in-law sold their guns for, I don't know how much. But, good guys, they follow the rules. The bad guys don't. So they have arms. They're actually now a militia because they're like, hey, you know what? Screw the government. They actually have more power than the government. So that's why I tend to go in that range where, like, you know what? I think the guns are fine for, you protect yourself. But also, I don't know, because if you organize a well-rounded militia, you overtake a lot of the people, a lot of the government. So that's why I'm like, I'm very, don't know. Because if you talk to my wife about it, people in Mexico, also people are like, well, why don't they fight against like the cartel? Well, first of all, they can't because they don't have a gun, because you can't buy a gun. Maybe you can find it illegal, but legally, you know, a good person doesn't do that. So I don't know. See that balance? It's
Yeah. One of the issues about guns for self-protection, and I, you know, I mean, my spouse obviously carried a gun for 26 years and was well trained. He was quite a good marksman. He had to qualify every year. He retired at the point at which, because of his Parkinson's, he could no longer qualify with a gun. But statistically, if you have a gun in your house, it's actually more likely to be used against you. And I'll just tell you one story, and it turned out well, but there was potential for disaster. My husband always kept his guns locked up at the police department, and we had another cop come and stay with us for a number of months because he was having a rough time at home, and so we just said, yeah, stay. We got an extra bedroom. It's yours. He had a gun in his top dresser drawer. And one night we were all out at another friend's house having dinner. And we came back and walked in on a group of 5 men who were burglarizing the house. And fortunately, they were afraid of us, and they went flying out the back door, dropping my skis and my camera in the backyard as they tried to get over the fence as quickly as they could. If they had gotten to the room where the gun was, they could have used it against us. Fortunately, they didn't get that far. They were still destroying our bedroom at the time that we walked in on them.
Oh, okay.
Ultimately, there were 5 of them, and they were ultimately caught because, believe me, our house was covered in fingerprint powder after that burglary. You know, the entire police department wanted to help.
That's good.
And they did catch the guys eventually, but that's the peril, right? That somebody else gets to your gun before you do, or you don't have what it takes to shoot, or somebody gets the gun away from you and uses it against you. As soon as there's a gun involved, the level of violence escalates. And so I think it's kind of a myth that a gun at home will make you safer. There's also the problem that we've seen in the news, particularly over the last 5 years or so, that somebody comes to the front door for perfectly innocent purposes and somebody shoots them.
I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard a few stories. Actually, I have.
It's been in the news. Yeah, it's been in the news. So, you know, I'm not sure that I would want a gun in the house in my house for all those reasons, but it's an individual decision. I think the nation needs to take a really hard look at the statistics in terms of gun-related deaths, suicides, mass killings and so on. And I think we need to balance public safety against individual rights. And I don't think we effectively have that balance yet.
Do you think people that, for example, I'm going to say like I'll say, people that are for guns, like they like it a lot. Do you think they prefer it because they're afraid that, a government will get too big and they'll have more control? Because that is also, well, maybe not. Someone could correct me. I think my wife could correct me. I'm just speaking my experience. In Mexico too, the cops, like the cops, not the military, but the cops, well, they technically the only people that carry guns. They're not like the nicest people, and they are horribly corrupt. I think that, and also in other countries too, because they got it. So do you think people are also afraid because they're like, hey, how come either the cop or the government, they could have a gun to protect themselves, not me? Because what if they use their power against me? You think that maybe that's one?
Yeah,
or...
it actually gets complicated because people have guns for all kinds of reasons. Like most of my friends hunt.
Yep.
And they have a gun because they want to go off once a year and shoot a deer that they'll then eat. My son-in-law is an enthusiastic hunter, and he loves to go out to Colorado every year to hunt elk. He's got a list of game, and they eat everything they kill.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very different from somebody who has a gun because they're afraid.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that if you've got a gun because you're afraid, I'm not sure that a gun's going to make you safer in your home. And that's just as somebody who's looked at those statistics, who's really thought a lot about gun control. And then in between, there are people who love to shoot targets. I mean, we have a shooting range here in the county, and there's a shooting club that runs it, and they're out by Clay County Park on, I think it's I don't remember the street, but it's off Timber Road, and that's shooting as a sport, right? People go there and they shoot at targets, and they try to get better and better. My husband did target shooting as part of his job every year. Yeah. So there are lots of different reasons that people have guns.
Speaking on some of the issues in the U.S., because you're an expert, I'm not, because you're in political science. Is there any, because we're going way off topic now, but is there any things that you think we can improve on in the U.S.? It could be about anything. Because another thing that's very popular right now is the immigration. And I've talked about it, and I have a very different opinion. Because the good thing because I come from a family that are, immigrants. I know a lot of people back home that are. So, and it's, man, I wish I had a side. It's because I understand the people say that, hey, they're coming in illegally. And I'll give you my perspective, not now, but before. People are saying they're coming in illegally, they're breaking the law, they should go back home, send all the families and their kids. And because they'll say they're criminals and this and that. I don't know how it is right now. I should pay more attention to the news. But from my perspective, what I've seen, like all these people, they're actually nice. And they come here a lot. They come here. I have family members that also came here. They come here because their country is like horrible. It's bad. They come here. They just want to work. That's it. And they send their money back home. They actually don't want to stay. My cousin did the same thing. He came here, stayed here for 4 years. He went to California, went back home. Nothing. I asked him how his trip was, and it's horrible because you apply for a visa, and he didn't get it because it's everyone's applying for it. So that part I understand. So he got, I don't know how much he paid. I think he paid like $7,000, not pesos, to get a coyote to cross him. And he told me the story how like him and his friend, they were crossing over. I don't know if it was Arizona or New Mexico. And, they hear something, a lady fell, she died, and they have to run and this and that. Like, man, dude. And there's another person that they crossed from not Central America, South America. All these stories, they're so desperate to get here. Mm-hmm. So that's why that part, I don't know the solution because and also I'll tell you one thing. A lot of people don't know. I don't know where they're getting it from. They say about, these immigrants, or my bad, the legal immigrants, they get government like government benefits and all this. I don't know where they get that from because you have to have a social security number. If you don't have a social security number, you cannot get, like, for example, the food stamps or this and that. Even, for example, some of the schools, I think they'll reason, but like getting like free lunch or reduced lunch, it requires all that. Because a lot of people that I know, they don't have a social security number. They are not doing anything illegal because if they get caught, they could go to jail, get deported. So even like, driving, they're very wary. So I just don't know where that thing is. I don't know where people get that from. But I also do understand, like, hey, there are people that are trying to come here legally, and these other people are cutting in line. So it's It's super, for me, I think it's more complicated than it is,
Mhm.
because from my perspective, I think, well, actually do. A lot of people just come here, they just want to work because they make more money here than over there. And in the summer, we went to Mexico. It's been like 4 years, but we finally went for vacation. And I was talking to my nephews, and uh, one of them is actually born here. The other one isn't. But we were talking about the different situations here versus over there, because over there it's normal for people to work more than 12 hours, especially also if you're a kid. It's not slavery or nothing, but they work. And I was telling them, we like joke around, like you hear like, for example, I'm not saying here, but like here in the U.S., you hear like the typical, oh, like a high school or college kid working summer job. They're like, oh, this is horrible. I can't believe I'm working like 4 or 5 hours on the weekend. This sucks. And I got to tell them that. They're like, really? That's what they do? I'm like, you could get like a summer job and you can only work. They're like, really? Because they work like 8 hours, 12 hours, weekends. They go to school, this and that. And like I tell them the salaries. For example, here it could be like at Walmart. I think their starting rate $17.50. Someone could correct me on that. Tell them that if you translate into pesos, it's a lot of money for them. Of course, all these people want to work or come over, work, because even like the jobs, it's not like the people that want to either work like not in agriculture, but like, for example, in California, picking, or it could be even construction or this and that. Something that's like people that here they don't want to work, they'll just take it because it's a better condition than when they're from.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't know the solution. I don't know if it's better. Oh, you got to get more work, or if they got to get more work visas, or maybe make the process faster, do seasonal. I went on a rant on that, but
Yeah.
what do you think?
So, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, immigration is a divisive issue in the United States, and I think that the Trump campaign has vilified immigrants in unfair ways. I will be open about the fact that there are many immigrants who have married into my family and are very dear to me. I was fortunate to, over the last few years, to go to a number of citizenship ceremonies where, immigrants who've married into the family became U.S. citizens. But, the U.S. has a labor problem. We have a labor shortage right now, and of historic proportions. We have also restricted immigration more in recent years. That doesn't make sense. If we need labor, immigrants are an excellent source of labor. And as we've done these immigration crackdowns, as immigration becomes more restrictive, we have fewer workers doing essential jobs like working in meatpacking plants. These are jobs Americans don't want. And other people are glad in exchange for living here to do those jobs. Agricultural labor. We need more agricultural laborers. Food costs increase when we restrict immigration.
Yep.
Because the hourly rate has to go up in order to attract workers. So we're kind of working against ourselves here, right? Immigration creates a vibrant economy. And this has been for millennia, right? Rome, one of the characteristics of Rome, right, was that they invited people in from everywhere, and they had a dynamic economy. As we restrict immigrant labor more and more, it hurts our economy, it increases inflation, and it changes the character of our society in ways that I don't think are good for us. And that's not to say that I'm for unrestricted immigration. If we had unrestricted immigration, we would pretty soon have a huge problem, right? Absorbing, and as more immigrants and as more and more countries begin to fail or their economies begin to fail, more and more people want to come to the U.S. So yes, I believe in immigration restrictions, but I don't believe in vilifying people who want to come here because they want to work. And I don't believe in restricting immigration so much that we cannot staff critical industries like agricultural industry.
I think it's more complicated than what people think. I remember like my dad. So my dad, he was born in Mexico, and then he came when he was either, he told me first grade or third grade, but he said, so this was in the 70s. He said back in the day, the border was like literally a line, like just a line. You could cross. People, it would be common. They would just go back and forth. And then I don't know what happened, but then I guess they got more restricted in the U.S. And then, because then, in my mind, actually probably in their mind too, they're like, hey, well, if it's harder to come back and forth, we might as well just stay here. Like, there's no point because it's gonna be a pain. And but so my dad said his favorite president is Ronald Reagan, because I think what he did was gave residency or citizenship to a bunch of people.
Yeah, well, I think it was probably the 1986 Immigration Reform Act that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I don't actually credit Ronald Reagan with that. I credit my former boss, Congressman Bruce Morrison, who was chair of the immigration subcommittee at the time in the House of Representatives in Congress. And he worked really, really hard on that bill. And it gave citizenship to certain groups. We had always had pretty tight quotas, and it changed the quota system. And so a lot of people became eligible to come here because of that law. Ronald Reagan signed it, but my former boss did a lot of the writing.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that. So that's another thing I talked about with my mom. She mentioned, because she says, hey, do you think, because you hear a lot of people right now are crossing, a lot of people, are they thinking that whoever becomes president, they're going to do another
amnesty?
Amnesty. Is that why they're like, well, might as well stay here, see if we could get that whatever, so we could work? Do you think that's what they're doing also?
I'd be surprised if there was another massive amnesty. But I think we could do a much, much better job of writing reasonable legislation that would permit immigration based on the need for workforce and the need to reunite families. So I think one of the problems is that I know one person who has a mom who's aging in Mexico, and she would love to go back, but she could never be certain of getting back in the U.S. And so she can't.
That's a common thing. I know that happened with my uncle. He, for some reason, I don't know why he did it. He got residency. No, or was it before? Something happened with his daughter, my cousin. But right now she's fine. This was years ago. But he was like so indecisive because first of all, he wants to go see his daughter. Something happened, but he knows like, hey, if I leave, I can't come back. So it was one of those difficult things, and it kind of sucks because and I'm gonna say a lot of people do not understand, because if you're born here and you have like generations of family here, it's you got family here. But from knowing like another country or this and that, like, hey, or some people, they're married and they're like, hey, what if I get separated or this and that? Like, I think people got a picture. Like, imagine right now if someone separated your wife and your kids, like, hey, we're taking them to another country. Of course you're gonna be like, hey, that's what's going on. I think it's very complicated because also, there are people trying to come in legally and they're like, hey, I waited years. How come they get to do this? I might as well have just done this the whole time. So super complicated. But I think that makes it seem, the good thing is that the U.S., people want to come to the U.S. because they know it's a great place. I love it. I think it's an amazing place, because me and my dad, before when I was younger and I thought I knew everything, I would complain. And my dad would be like, you know what? No, this place is actually amazing because, you could, in other countries, you could burn the flag and you go to jail. Other places, you can't even talk about certain things and it's horrible. Here, my people might not like it, but at least you could do it. You could, that's what it is, the freedom of speech stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, so many people are fleeing really frightening situations. I had a friend from Uganda who wrote me a letter many years ago about having to hide in the jungle because security forces had raided the little community where she lived, and they were basically raping and pillaging. And so she had to hide for several days with no food and no water. So people are fleeing these terrible situations. She ultimately went to Lesotho. But there's a reason people want to come here, because we have a safe and well-ordered society where there's opportunity. And that's why people come here. They come here for safe civil society and opportunity to work. And we're at a place in the economy of the U.S. where we need workers. And so we're kind of working against ourselves in the level of restriction that we have. And I have no issue with restrictions, but I think we could do a way better job with deciding who can come. The refugee status is still operational. I think that's a super important program when people are fleeing for their lives. The U.S. should be a place where they can come and where they could rebuild their lives. And that's important as well. I think particularly women in the Middle East, can make a good case for what's going on there right now.
I agree. I do agree. So we are running out of time and I'm running out of battery. But before we end it, is there any last words you wanted to give out?
Yeah, I think overall, I'm here because I think that Vermillion is about the highest quality life I've known in my life, and I've lived in a number of different states. I'm excited about this community, and I'm excited about where it's going in the near term and the long term. I hope sincerely that more young people will get involved in the planning and creating of this community. I'm ready to be a mentor, right? I'm stepping aside from public service, but I'm encouraging every person I know in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s to get involved, because I'm stepping aside to make room for you.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much for being on.
Well, my pleasure. It was fun.